incoming juniors, incoming seniors, just graduated. Nice, nice. So we're I'm gonna turn this off. That's okay. Can you all hear me? Okay. So we're super excited that you're here. Today's discussion is really about careers in public service. So we're going to get into our discussion in a bit, but we are joined by a group of distinguished panelists who have really committed themselves to public service over the many years. And I'll have them introduce themselves. But today's discussion is about how do we think about change making? How do we think about community building? How do we think about building the future that we want as an Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community? So by way of introduction, my name is Kareem Farishta. I was on the Kapal board just until last year. And like many of you, I came to the city as an intern and then worked my way through government. So I worked at the Obama White House doing intergovernmental affairs and working on public engagement. And most recently worked in the Biden administration at the Department of Defense at the Pentagon with our governors and mayors as the director of intergovernmental affairs. And now I am an adjunct graduate lecturer at George Washington University, where I teach on cities and states and national security. And I am the senior director for state and local government at C3AI, a AI company that's dedicated to thinking about digital transformation in the public sector. So with that, I will hand it over to Sarat.
Thanks, Kareem. Hi, everybody. Sarat at the Pit. This is actually full circle for me because back in, I forget the year now, maybe 2006, 2007, I was actually co-chair of the WLP program. So it's really, special place in my heart for this program. So I'm super excited to be here with you all. Let's see, my journey was pretty typical until I hit law school and was like, what is going on here? So I don't think I want to be a lawyer. And so I ended up going to my state legislature to work in my first policy position in Illinois state legislature. And then eventually made it out to DC and worked for my home state senator. I spent altogether probably about almost 10 years on the Hill between the House and mostly on the House and a little bit of time on the Senate. And then had an opportunity to go to California and continue to work for my now former boss in the AG's office out in California. And then eventually made it back to DC and worked in the Biden administration, where I served as the assistant US trade representative for intergovernmental affairs and public engagement, where I was just absolutely delighted to work for my friend, Ambassador Catherine Tai, who is a member of the cabinet. And then had a brief stint in the private sector and realized that my heart is truly in public service. And now I'm where I'm at, which is APEX. Some of you may be familiar with it, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. And there I am the VP for Programs and Community Engagement. So super excited, happy to take any questions, and I will pass it on to my co-panelists.
Thank you. So my name's Kent, pronouns he, him. So my journey has been all over the place. I graduated with a degree in visual arts, and I studied film studies as a minor. And I studied that because I didn't know what I wanted to do as a career. I just knew I liked doing art and film, so I majored in that. But when I graduated, partly because of imposter syndrome, I didn't think I was good enough to be like an artist full-time or like a filmmaker. And so I thought back on what I wanted to do, what I enjoyed doing. And I was heavily involved in the Vietnamese Student Association in college. So I held various leadership positions. I loved event planning, developing workshops, and just developing like young people. And so I was like, okay, maybe like I want to do something that helps people. And so I thought of 3 different career paths. One was social work, but I didn't want to go back to school because I love school, but I can't do tests. I just am not good at that. And then HR was another option. But then I have friends who work in HR and they're like, oh, you're really helping the company, not necessarily helping employees. So I was like, okay, I don't want to do HR. So my last option was nonprofit. But I didn't know what it meant to work for a nonprofit. I was like, how do nonprofits make money? How do you get paid to work for a nonprofit? I don't know. And so I just spent a lot of time applying to different nonprofits. Didn't get any acceptances or anything like that. And so I spent the first couple of years post-grad just doing various part-time jobs. And then I took a chance and moved my life from Louisiana, where I was born and raised, to Portland, Oregon. Without any job in line, I just lived with a friend in Portland. And to kind of like force myself to work hard and like get a full-time job. And then by chance, I was able to get a job in Chicago for a startup tech company that makes smart water bottles, where it like tracks how much water you drink and it reminds you to drink water. And so I was a programs associate. No, sorry, I don't remember the job, but it was like I was assistant to the CEO at the time at the startup. So I moved to Chicago for a year, worked for them, and then after a year, OCA had where I work now, OCA Asia Pacific American Advocates, the nonprofit. They were hiring for a fellow. And so I decided to apply to that. It was something more in line with what I like to do, whereas programming, you work with youths, you do workshops, so everything I loved doing in college. And so I applied for the fellowship, got it, and then moved to DC, and I've been there since 2019. And so now I am the senior programs manager at OCA, and I oversee the internship program, scholarships, and leadership and advocacy trainings for high school and college students, and then just various other programs at OCA. So yeah, that's up to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Yu. I think 3 out of the 5 of us here have a Chicago connection. And it wasn't until Sarat was talking about her first job that I remember I had the same job. I had completely forgotten. But my career actually did not start in public service. I came out of law school, sort of did, I'd always wanted to work in public service in sort of like a vague way, like who doesn't want to help people, but it wasn't something I was like, this is gonna be my path. And so I did like what was the easy thing to do, which was like everyone just comes out of law school and goes to a law firm. So I went to a law firm and hated it. I really, for a number of reasons, but it was just clearly not a good fit. And so then I went and I worked in the same job that Sarat had worked in, which is for our state legislature. This was obviously in Illinois, so Springfield, Illinois. And I loved it. I loved, it's like a hill job, but for the state legislature. And I loved just being in the mix. I loved kind of, having that ability to like think about policy and to think about how to translate that into legislation. And state legislature is not like Congress. Like I passed like, dozens of bills in like one session. Versus whereas like you have staffers who are on the Hill for years and like they never get to pass a bill. And so I was just totally hooked. I loved it so much. So that was my first job in the public sector. And really, I think my commitment to public service came about like in the middle of my career, where I realized the work that I get to do in public service is just objectively more interesting than what's kind of available, at least to me, in the private sector. And so I went from that job to, then I felt like kind of guilty I wasn't using my law degree. And so I went back, I was assistant AG in Chicago, because I felt like, okay, I should maybe like give this law thing like one more try before I give up on it. And just like turns out I don't really like practicing law, whether it's for a private law firm or for, a government agency. So in that case, assistant AG of Illinois. And yeah, I didn't like practicing law. So I thought about what I did like, which was I loved that job in the Illinois State House. And so I decided, also for personal reasons, was like thinking about moving to DC. And so I was like, I'm just gonna do it. So I moved to DC. This was before they paid interns on the Hill. And I took all of my, big law money, which was great. I was very glad to have had that. And I funded my own internship. I basically just volunteered on the Hill for 8.5 months, living off of my savings, landed a job. And from then on, spent about 8 years on the Hill, doing committee work, 4 years in the Senate, 4 years in the House, so evenly split. And then, the Biden administration came in. So I started with a DOL, doing doing congressional and intergovernmental affairs. Did 2.5 years of that. Then, happy to talk in more detail about why I've kind of jumped around, but then I was recruited to go to a law firm. And thought, okay, well, like I'm way more senior now. It's a smaller law firm. Maybe I'll like it. The money was great. And I went and again, just kind of realized it's very different. And so if anyone's kind of interested in, you know, my experience with the public sector and in the private sector, I'm happy to go into it in more detail, you know, later on, but it was a completely different law firm environment than my first experience. And yet there were just certain things that were the same. And I realized like, this is just really not for me. And so I was there for a year. And I reached back out to the administration and said like, kind of want to come back in. Is there anything available? And there was a spot as the chief strategy officer for the Export-Import Bank, which is an independent federal agency. And I went there, loved it. Wish I could have gotten to stay, but post-election, obviously that was not possible. And so that's my, you know, quick career path. And I'm searching for my next move right now. And happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. And our last panelist, Dilpreet, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Kareem, hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you. It's so nice to see you.
It's good to see you. Well, apologize for joining virtually. In person is always better, but I am based in LA, and that is because I am the Deputy Mayor of International Affairs for the city of LA as a few months ago. Prior to that, I served in the Biden administration at the White House and at the Pentagon. And I'm proud to say that my entire career thus far has been in public service, either at the federal level or at the local level, specifically working for the city of Los Angeles. So rewinding the tape a little bit, the reason I got into government and public service is because of an internship, which is, I think, is a common story. I graduated undergrad during the recession. And so a lot of us at that time who were coming out of school were really struggling to find jobs. And so as a result, I ended up doing an internship at the State Department on the India desk, and was able to eventually, after being unpaid for quite a while, was able to transition that into an actual kind of, you know, position within the civil service of the State Department. So that was during the Obama administration. And while I was at the State Department, I was able to detail over to the National Security Council, where I worked for the National Security Advisor at the time, Susan Rice. And then we had an election and there was a change in party. And so I returned back to the State Department, again, because I was career civil service at the time, and went back to the State Department. I actually went to Iraq from there. So served in Iraq for about 4 or 5 months until I decided to leave federal government. And I was really lucky. I landed in local government working for the city of Los Angeles, which at the time was setting up an international affairs team within City Hall. And I was in LA City Hall for those 4 years of the first Trump administration. And then when the Biden election was ongoing, was asked to join the transition team. So I joined the Biden-Harris transition team and was working on the agency review team of the National Security Council, where I had worked once before, and was offered a position in the National Security Council on day one. So I was part of the Biden administration from day one, and walked out of the White House on January 20th of this year. And I'm very lucky that I landed back in local government, back in the city of LA, and just really, really fortunate to serve as deputy mayor. Looking forward to the questions. I do have to hop off the call promptly at 7, but looking forward to the conversation and hearing from the fellow co-panelists. Thanks, Kareem.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Dilpreet, and thanks so much to our panelists. I personally am so inspired to be sitting alongside so many great public servants, but today's conversation is careers in public service. It's not just a title, it's really an invitation to you all to think about what this looks like for you this summer, and then hopefully for years and years to come. And I hope this is the first chapter in that. But I also want to be very honest with you. Like, public service is challenging. And it's no surprise to anyone in this room that we are at a very, very tumultuous and challenging period in our nation's history, particularly for our communities and those we care about. And it's certainly not lost on me, and I'm sure it's not lost on the fellow panelists as we begin to grapple with and think about what's going on at present and what is the vision that we want to build for the future. And the truth about public service is that, you know, at times it's not very glamorous. Sometimes it's underfunded. At times it gets politicized. And at times it can be very exhausting. So all of us are going to be incredibly vulnerable and honest with you to talk about the realities of what's going on in public service. But also there's a really hopeful tenor to all of this. And that hopeful tenor is that public service is perhaps one of the strongest levers that we can pull on as a community to shape the institutions and to shape our democracy in the way that we want it to go. And for that, I think there's a tremendous amount of innovation, of creativity, and of dreaming that we can do together to fight for justice, and to achieve the policy goals that we want for our communities, whether they be locally, at the state level, or federally. So we're going to talk about that, but we're also going to talk about how do you all use your talents, your ingenuity, your fire that's in you when you wrote your applications to apply for Kapal and the various internships that you're at, to think about what are the unique strengths that you bring? How do you leverage your identity? And today's discussion is the first in the series of 6 discussions that we'll have throughout the course of this summer. So it's critical as an Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community to be really visible, to be vocal, to be values oriented at a time when there's a tremendous amount of pushback. So the first question that we're going to get into is around what was the light bulb moment that some of us had to really think about what public service looks like. What does it mean to actually ground ourselves in the truth of what's happening? And then we'll end today's discussion by talking about power. And I hope that throughout the course of the summer, you continue to go back to this idea of how do we build community power? How do we activate our strength? And ultimately, how do we ensure that the folks who are sitting in this room continue to multiply and grow in terms of the impact that we want to have on our communities and the impact that we want to have in our country? So with that, I'm going to start us off with a question for Kent and for Dilpreet. First to Kent to talk about that light bulb moment that you had as you were entering public service, and maybe if you could kind of think about that one specific moment that animated a lot of what's going on today.
So yeah, I talked a little bit about it in the beginning about how I just didn't want to pursue a career in what I graduated in. And so nonprofit ended up being the only option because, you know, HR and social work, I didn't want to pursue those. And so again, I didn't know what nonprofit meant. I applied to a bunch of different, I just Googled nonprofit and like applied to all those jobs, but didn't know what that meant. I didn't really develop any skills in college about like how to tailor your resume professionally to the job you want, stuff like that. And so I really didn't know how to even get my foot into the door with nonprofit. And so thankfully I had a lot of community support. I had friends who did Kapal, as well as people who worked in DC, and I asked them like, hey, like, can you please, you know, look over my resume, look over my cover letter, you know, help me learn how to be professional. Where should I look for nonprofit jobs? I actually applied to a lot of nonprofits that are like in this room right now. Didn't get the job, but that's okay. That's, you know, I'm figuring it out. And I actually applied to OCA, actually didn't get the offer. And so like I said, I spent a lot of years just trying to find my way here. And so like I said, with the Chicago job, where I was just like an assistant to the CEO. That was my first full-time job. It wasn't something I was passionate about. It was just, I just needed a job. And then I also did a fellowship for a film fellowship, just because again, I wasn't getting a nonprofit job. So I was like, I'm gonna try something. And so I got a film fellowship with there used to be a nonprofit at the time called Jubilee. They operate as Jubilee Media now on YouTube, but they were Jubilee Project at the time. So I did a fellowship with them. And it was all about like doing projects with impact. And so it was a 2-week fellowship in Los Angeles, and we had to produce like a film with a documentary in 2 weeks. We produced a documentary for my group on a immigrant from Mexico. And it was a really powerful documentary, just talking about her struggles and just like, you know, advocating for immigration rights, stuff like that in America. And so I knew like I wanted to continue helping people in some kind of way, but I didn't know what kind of way. And thankfully, while I was living in Chicago, my friend who did Kapal, who ended up working for the USDA because Kapal placed her with USDA, she knew the manager at the time at OCA and who also did Kapal. So they knew each other through the Kapal program. And I was able to apply to the OCA fellowship and hop on a call with the OCA staff member who did Kapal and like just get to know him, introduce myself before I even applied, you know, and just like get my foot in the door that way. And I think that really helped, like just show the initiative and having a positive word of mouth from my friend who can advocate for me. And so thankfully, you know, even though I got rejected from OCA a couple years before, I made my way there and have been there ever since. So it's been a zigzag journey with a lot of different random.
And I think that's gonna be a theme that comes up a lot, right? Like zigs and zags in the public service journey. But Dilpreet, I wanted to go to you. What was your like light bulb moment as you were getting into public service, thinking about some of this stuff? And yeah, tell us a bit more.
Yeah, you know, my parents, like many of yours, immigrated from another country. In my case, from Punjab, which is in northern India, and they both worked in local government. My dad worked in county government as a civil engineer. My mom was part of the county's fire and rescue department. And I think, you know, there's a lot of sense of purpose in public service, and there's a sense of economic stability and security in government jobs, or at least there was. And so I think that maybe was not an overt reason why I connected with public service, but it certainly must have sort of subconsciously resonated. I think, you know, for me, when I did that internship with the State Department, that sense of problem solving that comes in public service. I think one of the panelists mentioned that the problems you have to contend with and attempt to solve in public service are just more interesting, they're harder, and the impact that they can have in terms of size and scale and scope are just so much kind of bigger that's very addicting, I think. And one of the reasons why I continue to pursue opportunities in public service and in the public sector. The other thing I would say in terms of the light bulb moment or sort of what keeps me going or interested in this field, because to your point, Kareem, it's not without its challenges and drawbacks, is that the caliber of talent, the types of people that are drawn to these types of roles is just of a really, really high quality. I think the sense of commitment to the work creates this community of people that you just really want to work with them. And the other thing I would say is just being able to wake up and go every day to a job that is purpose and mission driven is another sort of reason why I think public service is so powerful and important and keeps you engaged and interested. And that's certainly been the case for me.
Yeah, I think Dilpreet said this so aptly. It's all about the people that you work with and the folks that you get to know through these roles. But Kathy, did you want to chime in and maybe share your perspective?
Yeah, I absolutely echo that it's very addictive. The amount of power that you can have in especially government work, I think, is something that, you know, I've had a number of light bulb moments, you know, one of which was when I was just starting out on the Hill. We were doing an investigation into something that DOD was doing. And just like me picking up the phone and saying, like, I want to talk to like a 3-star general. Next week, that 3-star general was sitting in our conference room across from me, answering all the questions, right? Like they had to answer to me. And there I was, like in my 20s, with very little experience, I should say, in this work. And it was totally addictive. And, you know, then I also got to see when I was doing investigations on the Hill, especially when we were investigating private companies, you know, they would bring in their outside counsel that were at the law firms, like the exact same ones that, you know, I worked in. And they would come in and there would be somebody at my level coming in with the partners to defend their client, you know, who was like the CEO of a pharma company or, you know, whatever. And that person who was at my level would be in the corner taking notes while the partners were kind of like doing the actual work and the defense work. And there I was on the other side, I was asking the questions, right? And like they had to answer and we had subpoena power. And that is incredibly addicting. So it's not necessarily like an altruistic reason, but it's thrilling. And it's hard to, I think, step away from that once you've had that experience. You know, I also, and it's also just, it's not even just kind of like in government, this is sort of unique to government, like kind of the power you have. But it's also just more interesting. You know, I think in the private sector, in my experience, people are often like put into like, you do something really well, they're gonna have you do more of that thing because you do it really well and you're, you know, recognized for that. Whereas in public service, like nobody's got time and nobody's got enough staff to like just have one person doing one thing. And so you're doing everything. So when I came in day one of the Biden administration, I mean, I was like one of 2 employees in the congressional and government affairs team. And I had to like figure out what our congressional plan was. I had to figure out like, you know, all this, I had to figure out like how to get our nominee for Secretary of Labor, like, you know, work on getting him confirmed. I also had to figure out like how to get water in the office for people, right? And so it's the breadth of work that you, and the experience you have sort of juggling everything and prioritizing, and you get that from a very early standpoint, simply because of a shortage of resources and a shortage of people, in government, in nonprofits, and right, like funding's always an issue. And so it's very exciting. You get experience that you wouldn't otherwise have. And so I think, you know, I just had a series of light bulb moments where I'm like, this is just better than the alternative.
And Sarah, what about you?
I think for me, my light bulb moment in terms of just what could happen is, so my parents are immigrants from Thailand, and in Chicago, the Thai community is not terribly large, but one of the interesting things, I forget how old I was. I might have been like 10, 11, 12, somewhere around that age. There was this artifact that the Art Institute of Chicago had, and it was, you know, this artifact that was from one of the temples in Thailand, and it was on, you know, display at the Art Institute. And, you know, it was one of these artifacts that, you know, it was questionable how it got there. And it was probably my first memory of seeing the community just get together and go and just demonstrate like weekend after weekend, just walking around the Art Institute. I think my parents took me, and at some point, and I don't remember the details of how, but at some point that was returned. And for me, that was probably one of my first light bulb moments of, you know, this is what it means. It's not directly related to public service, but it's about organizing and about making your voice heard. And when you bring, you know, a lot of voices together, you can have a huge impact. And so for me, that always stuck with me. And I always saw it as, well, you know, the community was able to bring elected leaders and community leaders together and create that pressure, and got a result. And so I think in my mind growing up, even though, you know, at one point I, you know, thought I would go and practice law, which I did for a hot second, but again, left it as quickly as I entered it. I went right into public service and government, because that's where I saw you can really make an impact. Like one person could really make, you know, a huge impact with a lot of people in a very positive way. So I think that's probably my first light bulb moment.
That's so helpful, and this idea that I keep hearing is like, go to law school, but don't practice law. I feel like that's the theme that's coming out of today's discussion. I actually want to go to Dilpreet and to Sarat, because I told you that we were going to be very vulnerable and very honest. In public service, as I said, is challenging. There's burnout associated with it. And I think it's really important, especially as you're getting started in your careers, to think about what you're going to do and build a practice of taking care of yourselves, taking care of your partner, taking care about your family, and your broader aspirations in how you want to exist and move in this world. So I'll go to Dilpreet to just kind of walk us through what are the tips and tricks that you use as someone who's stayed in public service for so long? How do you not get bogged down by the challenges, but also uplifted in moments of crisis?
Yeah, thanks for the question. You know, I'm still figuring it out, but I will share what I've learned thus far. Which is that who you work with is really important, so that those long nights, long hours, you know, challenging issues, you're surrounded by people that you want to be around. At the National Security Council, it's no surprise or secret that people work essentially 7 days a week in person, in a SCIF. So you don't have your cell phone, you don't have your personal email, and the conditions are challenging. Again, a lot of things have changed in this current administration. So I'm obviously speaking about the way it has been for decades. And so, you know, I think that the time I was most challenged in terms of burnout was definitely the times I've been at the National Security Council. And so community is really important in terms of the people that you work with, but then also outside of work, the times you're able to not be at work. Maintaining a sense of identity that is beyond your profession, I think, is really important, and trying to find the things that make you a whole human being, whether that's hobbies or, you know, your community outside of work, volunteering outside of work. I think for me, my family was a sense of that, and you know, my family was local to DC, and I was able to always sneak away for a home cooked meal, some time with my niece and nephews, and that really kind of helped me recharge my batteries. And the other thing I would say is, you know, maintaining some sort of like physical and mental health practice. For me, it was long walks, spending time in Rock Creek Park, going for runs. I also was lucky enough to live near work, so I was able to, you know, after a long day at the White House, was able to walk home, and that really helped me relax and sort of decompress from the day. So trying to figure out how to integrate that into your day-to-day. And then the last thing I would say is that there are times when you're gonna have a role in public service, and then there may be times when you don't. And those times that you're not, and you're not experiencing sort of a lot of stress or really tough sort of conditions, that those are the times to really invest in yourself and to recharge your batteries, so that when you do have the opportunity to go back in, if you will, you're ready to do that. And so I'm sure that a lot of people that left the Biden administration are doing exactly that during this time period, which is getting some well-deserved rest and regrouping for hopefully continued service in public service.
So Sarah, anything to add to that really helpful list from Dilpreet of keeping up, but also taking a step back when needed?
Yeah, I will definitely echo Dilpreet when she said, you want to like the people you work with. It's really important. You spend so many hours in the workplace that it's really tough if it's an environment that you're not as you know, where, you know, it's a challenging situation. I think for myself, it's always been keeping you know, friends and family as a good check on just keeping you grounded. And especially for me, having those like friends from grade school, high school, who do not pay attention to anything that the world that I live in, which is well, it used to be a lot more involved with politics, and just having those conversations with them of, hey, how's it going? How are your parents? How, you know, just everyday things that, and just not talking about what is going on, because in DC you can get wrapped up in that a lot. You know, making sure that, you know, if I'm having that girls trip, I make sure I get away. If I need my own time, you know, my workouts are sacred time for me, and because it's a time where I do not have to think about anything. I go to a place where someone tells me what to do, and I just do it. So there are things that I know that's what I also need. I also know that I love to read, and right now I'm really into fiction because it is just being able to escape in a fictional world and be taken places and just remembering, you know, this is this is not all we have here. There's so much more. And so I think knowing those things that bring you joy and happiness, just hang on to those things. Don't lose them. So again, just for each one of us, it's different, but just identifying what those things are. What is it that you need? And also identifying what is not helpful to you.
That's really important, yeah. So figuring out what is a good practice, right? Like maybe it's group fitness, maybe it's reading, as Sarat said, but also kind of coming back to your core, which you can make massive impacts on people's lives at like a daily level, at a community level, and it kind of goes back to where we started. This is about community building as much as it is about change making. So I want to go to Kathy, who has been able to weave her career and her identity, and I think really powerful and exciting ways, whether it's on the Hill, so she's had 4 years on the House, 4 years on the Senate side. She's at the Department of Labor, and then most recently at the Export-Import Bank. So Kathy, my question to you is around how have you weaved your identity in the various different roles you've worked on? So it seems like you've touched economic affairs, labor and justice and congressional engagement. Like, how does your identity show up? And then how do you, without making it so obvious, like let me wear my AA and HPI badge all the time, like how do you bring your identity with you?
Yeah, I think, it shows up, I mean, just like visibly, I'm often the only, person of color in the room, the only A and HPI person in the room, sometimes the only woman in the room. And so, right, like, I think for many of us, there's kind of no escaping it in that sense. I think it's, for me, it's showing up, and when you are the odd one out, you feel it, like you notice it. But it's also, I see that as like, okay, I'm here. I belong here. I can do things that, that make a difference, can open it for others. Sort of along the lines of what Kent was saying in terms of just thinking about how the work that you're doing impacts people. That, either share my identity or share aspects, or share, aspects of my identity that are, other people in my community that maybe is not my lived experience, but because, I know other people in the A and HPI community, I know that like not everyone, has the ability to like fund their own internship, to come out and work on the Hill, right? It was huge. Like, I was a big advocate of when there was a move to pay interns on the Hill. Had I not gone to a law firm first, I never would have been able to just like pay for my own apartment and do all that stuff to get my job on the Hill. That's like led to this career that I've had, right? And so it's always kind of thinking about like, yes, I was able to self-fund my internship, but I know that others in my community, people with my background, but for this one thing that I had, wouldn't have been able to. And so it's always just kind of being aware, when I was at the Department of Labor, the work that you do there, it's, we worked on behalf of American workers. But a huge part of that is, the A and HPI space, what kind of work, how can we make workplaces safer? Workplaces that, a lot of workplaces are pretty segregated, right? So like you have a certain group of people that are, heavily represented in certain workplaces, and always just thinking about, people who are not like you, which I think is something that we all, because we are not always in the majority, have a lot of personal experience thinking about our experience. I think that has just, it's that perspective. I think that just our identities give us. And I think in public service, particularly, you just have a lot of opportunities to always be questioning, and it's like, do we pay our interns more? Maybe we have fewer interns, right? But that expands the type of intern we can have, because not everybody can get by on 2,500 a summer. Some people can, right? But then if yes, maybe you have fewer interns, but if you expand the salary, then you can have a wider variety of interns. And so I think it's just kind of, it's built in, it's innate, it's part of my identity, and you kind of can't escape it. And I have to say, from the time I came to DC, to like, say, when I started in the Biden administration, there has been a real shift where people want to know, like, what does your identity bring to the table here? People are open to hearing about how your identity brings different things that, you know, you can bring to your work. And I've really noticed that difference in the decade plus that I've been in DC.
Really, really helpful. So thanks for sharing. So Dilpreet, I want to go back to you as someone who's had to do so much to weave your identity into the places that you've been in. Could you talk us through maybe an unexpected challenge or an obstacle that you faced over the course of your time in public service, and how has it really shaped you? How is it defining in that moment? And how do you navigate those really, really tough moments when they kind of overcome you in public service?
So, you know, I think I was not prepared for the outcome of the election in 2017. I had a lot of hopes for the country to have its first female president. I had a lot of hope for myself professionally in terms of what serving in another Democratic administration could mean for my development career-wise. And so I really had to think about a pivot. And that was hard. I think, you know, as I had mentioned earlier in the session, I started off as an intern and really had to, you know, do some bureaucratic jujitsu in order to get that internship to transition into an actual position. And, you know, I think I spent like 20% of my time trying to work HR to land that permanent role. And so becoming a member of the civil service was just a really amazing experience for me. And leaving that behind was really hard. And that being said, I think the fact that I ended up leaving federal government opened up this opportunity to look for other opportunities, including in local government. And it's not something I'd ever thought about before. And I was able to take a lot of my experiences from the federal government and bring them to the local level. And vice versa, I think working in local government has made me more effective when I have gone back into the federal level because of the proximity you have to the people that are actually impacted by the policy. And so I think that pivot was really informative for me career-wise to develop sort of career resiliency and to open up my sort of perspectives and you know, maybe take off some blind spots I had about local government. And then I would say similarly, you know, during this election cycle, it felt a little bit like deja vu. And I had to, again, make a pivot, and local government has welcomed me back once again. So like I said, I'm very lucky in that regard. But I think what it taught me and what I think is worth sharing with this group is that there are going to be times where you have to pivot, and the zigs and the zags may come because an opportunity presents itself, or because, you know, opportunities are taken off the table. And the ability to expand your skill set, your experiences, will serve you long term, but it may not all link together to make this sort of perfect narrative. And sometimes you read people's bios and you sort of you can see that through line. But often when you're in the position, you don't feel that way. You feel like you're sort of being pulled in one way, or you're scrambling to find something else. And so all of those experiences, whether they're predicted or sort of come out of the blue in terms of changes to your career, help kind of build your resiliency, but also make you more well-rounded. So I think for me, that's been really informative, but hopefully is helping me in sort of my career journey. So.
Well, thanks so much, Dilpreet. I know you have to head out in a couple of minutes, so we are incredibly grateful for your time. If any of y'all are looking to get into new sports, bureaucratic jiu-jitsu is a really tough sport, and it requires a lot of talent. And Dilpreet is a very, very talented Olympian in that regard. And speaking of Olympics, she's actually working on LA's entire strategy of international engagement as Los Angeles gets ready for the Olympic Games. So we're incredibly grateful for Dilpreet for sharing her time, and any final thoughts or pieces of advice that you wanted to share with the interns before you have to hop off?
Yeah, I mean, I think just echoing what you said in the beginning, Kareem, that I hope, it is my true hope that this community continues to be interested in public service and sees the public sector as a really powerful way to impact policy and make change, positive change in our communities and beyond. And so I implore you to continue to keep that in mind and to see hope in that field of work. And I've certainly been a beneficiary of working in public service and have just found it so meaningful, and that there are many opportunities, whether it's in nonprofits or philanthropy, local government, or even at the federal level, in the legislative branch. So good luck to everyone, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to spend some time with you. So thanks, Kareem, and thanks to everyone.
Thanks, Dilpreet. So we have about 5 more minutes. We might go over a couple minutes, but I'm just gonna ask the same question to all of our panelists. So what's that piece of advice that you want to share with the folks who are in the room right now? And as you're looking back, and if you were in their shoes today, what would you be telling yourself?
I guess I'll go first. I think what I would say to myself, when I was in your shoes, is to just be open to the possibilities. I had a very, at least the first decade and a half or so of my career, I had a very like planned out, or what I thought was my plan. Okay, I'm gonna do this and then this and then this and then that. And as I've gotten, you know, more this current and more recent years, we realized that when I've been open and just open to any possibilities, there are some really cool things that can come your way. I think a great example for me was, I mentioned that I was at the US Trade Representative's office. I had already given my notice. I was there for about a year, and then I had planned to just stay in the administration for the first year. And then I given my notice, and I got a call from the White House Presidential Personnel Office, which, for those of you who are not as familiar, the PPO office is where that handles all appointees in an administration. And PPO calls and says, you know, you're on your way out, but would you be willing to stay a few months longer? We can't tell you what any details, but it's an interesting opportunity. And I mean, that's basically all I had to go on. And I said, sure. And then they basically said, hold tight and we'll be back in touch. A week goes by, nothing. Like, hey, what am I, you know, this is already past my, the date that I was supposed to leave the administration. And it was, hold tight, we're just working on a few more things. But we can tell you what it is now. And essentially, it was an opportunity to get detailed to the White House and work with the White House legislative, the Senate team. And it was on the confirmations team. And so I had the opportunity to bring my stakeholder outreach skills to support the president's Federal Reserve Board nominations. And not only that, it was, you know, I had a chance to sit in the East Wing. So for 3 months, being able to walk into quite literally the White House every day and walk the colonnade to go get my, you know, hot water for my tea every morning and sit there and just soak it in and to say, enjoy every moment, because this is a really unique opportunity. And at the end, being able to see the first African-American woman be confirmed for the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and to feel that I had a small part in helping make that happen, who now she sits on the Fed board, where you all hear about the Fed almost constantly, and to know that here's someone that I was able to help, and others too. But just being a part of that is, again, an opportunity that had I said, oh, you can't give me any more details, I don't know, that opportunity would have passed me by. So long story short, be open.
That's a wonderful story. And such good advice for you all to hold on and to hold dearly. Kent, advice? As ominous lighting gets.
So, I know you asked for one, but I have five and real quick. So the first one is, network. I've told our OC interns this already, but honestly, like, people think networking is, oh, I have to meet with the presidents or CEOs or org, but really, the most important networking is like people on your level, like you will be growing together, and being each other's support system and references. Every cool opportunity I've gotten has been through people I met just through like clubs that I joined, just like meet friends and stuff like that. And like, the Jubilee Fellowship, my first full-time job at the startup company, OCA, they were all through friends that I made just through extracurriculars that, I attended in college. And so network with people here, people on your level. Secondly is to, don't let rejection discourage you. We've had several people, including myself, apply to things, get rejected, reapply later. Things happen for a reason. So just don't be discouraged. Work on improving yourself in any capacity towards your goal that you're reaching for. And then be a good person. Like, and I know it sounds like cheesy, but when I applied to my first full-time job and when I got my first full-time job at the startup company, I put on my resume that I was good at Excel, and I was not. And that's because I had a professor who told me just lie on your resume, like you'll learn on the job kind of thing. But in my interview, I had a task on Excel and I could not finish it. So I thought I bombed it and everything, but then I still had an interview with the CEO after bombing the task. And the reason why I got the job was because, to my CEO, you can always teach hard skills, but you can't really teach like personality fit and like, good character and team dynamic and stuff like that. And so luckily she took a chance on me. And so like, that's what I bring to like my work at OCA, like the interns that we accept, or even the new hires, our fellows, like, okay, like you have these skills or you seem like you can learn, but like, are you a good person? Do you seem like you're passionate and like genuinely care about, other people and stuff like that? And so just try to practice that in life, be a good person. And another one is take part in extracurriculars and, try to find creative ways to tailor your experiences to the job you're looking for. So I wouldn't have gotten any of my full-time jobs if I didn't do VSA in college, because I graduated art degree, which is not really relevant to the job in Chicago or at OCA. But because I had leadership development experience, budgeting experience, event planning experience from VSA, I was able to translate that to my work. And so it's important for you because, right now you guys are all in like public sector type internships, but you're going to be learning. Do you actually like doing this type of work at your internships? And so if you don't like the work you're doing, hopefully you can rely back on what you're doing on the side at your school, on campus, or even outside of school. I think that's everything. So yeah, I'll pass it to next week.
Okay, Kathy, you get the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously echo everything that's been said. It's all really good advice. I guess if I were to tell myself something to focus on, looking back now, I would tell myself to not only focus on what seems like interesting or prestigious, but also focus on what my strengths are. And so I think it's easy, especially in the beginning of your career, to be like, oh, this sounds really interesting, or like my friend's doing this thing that sounds really interesting, or, of course, like to focus on prestige, and kind of focus on the job. It's like the veneer of the job itself. But where I have found the most satisfaction in my work has been the work that focuses on my strengths. And if you kind of think about it, it makes sense, right? Like if it's something that you are naturally good at, or something that you've become good at, you're going to enjoy it more. It's going to be satisfying. You're going to do it well. You're going to, people are going to recognize that like you enjoy doing it. And so I think that's something that I wish I focused a little bit more on, which, one of my strengths is really managing chaos, making decisions. And it's something that, without fail, every job I've had where I've had the ability to just like make calls, that other people were like afraid to make or, didn't want to make, it's just kind of like a random thing that I've like learned about myself. And I know that like any job I have in the future should have that, because that's where I really get to work and achieve flow. And so spend some time thinking about not just what seems interesting, but also what you are actually already good at.
Wonderful. Well, that is such a nice place to end. We are so grateful to share our time with you. We're incredibly excited that y'all are in DC. And for all of you who are joining virtually, I hope this summer is filled with a lot of community, a lot of curiosity, and hopefully an opportunity to keep giving back to the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community. So thank you to our panelists, and back to Denise and to Hannah.
Yeah, so thank you, Kathy, Kent, Surratt. Oh, I think Kathy, Kent, Surratt, and Corinne, and to Dupree, even though she's signed off. But this was a fantastic panel. What wonderful insights for all of you as you embark on your careers in public service. This was a very thoughtful conversation this evening, great ideas and comments and insights from our panelists. If you enjoyed this first WLP session, there are more to come. Next Wednesday, we have one on how does DEIA affect me? So that should be an interesting topic. And I think it's in this, is it in this venue again?
No, it's a different venue.
Oh, okay, so it's a different place, but it'll be on June 11th. And you can register on the Kapal website. And you can also, again, follow us on social media for our scholarship and scholar and internship programs at Kapal DC. Thank you for our sponsors, Mopaya, and especially APIA Vote for hosting us here today and continuing to provide opportunities for AA and HPI in public service. And thank you for attending our first session this summer. It's going to be our opportunity to also fill out the surveys. You're having people fill out the surveys, and then also we have an opportunity for networking after we wrap up.
So before we wrap up, we do have a few questions from our virtual audience for the panelists, and then also for our in-person attendees. If you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand. So I'll kick it off with our virtual attendees first. Emmy Martin says, what are your thoughts on public service in the current administration? I don't know if someone would.
I'll take the first step at that. I think public service is ever like so much more important now because you know, the pendulum swings, and I think it's so critical to continue. This is a moment where there's still so many opportunities. So public service does not mean just the federal level. Public service means like Dilpreet, which is local level. There are opportunities at the state level. There are opportunities just everywhere. So it is absolutely even more so important. And I think if this is where you feel that your heart is, there will be opportunities, make those opportunities, seek out those opportunities.
There was one other question from Audrey Tam, who's also our Kapal SNI, and she says, what is the biggest misconception other people have, or you had, about working in public service?
I can go. I had this misconception, and my mom still does, like about how to make money, like as a career in nonprofit. And I was trying to explain, you'll make money from grants, foundations, federal grants, things like that. But you really can have a career and like have a living wage working for a nonprofit. You just just look for those opportunities. And yeah, I think those are the options, right? Federal grants, foundations, and individual donations. Yeah, that's the answer.
Awesome. So I think this is the last question from our virtual attendees, and then we can turn it over to our in-person audience. But Kathleen says, for Kathy and Surratt, what practical advice would you give to someone who's looking at law school right now with a strong intention of going into public service?
I'll go ahead and take that. I would, if you really think you're going to go into public service, I would look at the programs at the law schools that can help you both get into public service and also pay for law school. So there are a number of law schools, my alma mater included, where if you go into public service, I mean, things are shifting a little bit right now because like there might be some changes to the student loan federal situation. But at my law school, if you go into public service, and you come out with loans, there's a grant from David Rubenstein, founder of the Carlyle Group, who was an alum there, where he pays for the first 10 years of everybody's student loans that they are in public service. So you combine that with PSLF, which is student loan forgiveness in public service for 10 years, your law school education is paid for. It is not the only program out there. So I would really pay attention to, opportunities to both finance your education in law school, and also, and this is something that I felt like my law school was very lacking in, like everyone in my class just went to a law firm, look for those schools, and you get this information from talking to students who are there, talking to, the admissions outreach people at every school. Also look at the schools that have really strong relationships, either because a lot of their alumni are in public service, or they have just a lot of programs and, initiatives with like, there's some schools that like have a partnership with like certain organizations where they place their people. And so what you really need coming out of law school is, if you're not going kind of the traditional on-campus interview law firm path, to really, for opportunities to get into the work that you want to get into. But also obviously public service salaries are generally a little bit lower. And so like Ken said, perfectly good living, but lower. And so you do also want to think about, financing your education.
So, I really don't have much to add other than, go wherever you're gonna get the most money.
Yeah.
Because law school, I mean, it's amazing to me how expensive it is now, and I thought it was expensive when I went there, and, I'm dating myself now, but the late 90s. You wanna go again where you have the opportunities, the schools that do have that, a strong program in public service or public interest, but also that, look at where their alumni are, because that's where you'll be able to really tap into the network that they have. So, I would do it again, but I would definitely think about, law school, where I went differently.
And just to add on that a little bit, just one thing, nobody cares, like by the time you are where we are in our career, nobody cares where you went to, law school or grad school or wherever. I think it does sometimes matter, maybe like the first couple of years you're out. But I would say by the time you're 5 years out or more, nobody really cares. And so, I think a lot of times, at least I know I was like very focused on the prestige of the school, like looking at the rankings, like obsessed with the rankings, and it really just doesn't matter.
And let me add one more thing too, if you're interested in any field of medicine, the health professions, same thing goes, as law school. There are opportunities in government to get, your, degree, medical degree paid for, your fellowships and your internships. I was in the military for 26 years. I was a healthcare executive, and there were a lot of opportunities for people to get loan forgiveness in different organizations, not only the military itself, but your prisons, Indian Health Service, a lot of other places where you can use, where they have a shortage of people to do dentistry or medicine or nursing, that sort of thing.
Great. Any questions from you all?
Yeah, I have a question about sort of the balance between public service and power. I think like especially in like recent administrations, we see a lot of people, especially from our identity, sort of abandoning their identity and their values in pursuit of power. And I guess it's just something I've like always, I feel like is such a difficult balance, like people who want to be powerful and people who want to be public servants. And a lot of times like jobs, especially like on the Hill or in Congress, like are very much an intersection of the two. So I wonder if you guys like have any like advice on that, or sort of how you deal with that sort of delicate moments.
Yeah, let's take a couple questions. I know you've had one as well.
Oh, yeah, sorry, my question is, for Kathy. So I know you mentioned that you used your, earnings from Big Law to transition in your career at the Hill. But I also know that you mentioned that we shouldn't be searching for the prestige in our careers, but more of like which skill sets match us. I wanted to ask you, like, do you ever feel like there's a lot of like social pressures, especially within like Asian American culture, to like abandon this search for like prestige? Because you also mentioned that you did care about the ratings of the schools when you were going. And I'm from Denver, Colorado, so we have a really small Asian community, and I just finished my first year of college. And I've just seen so many students like change their entire career path just for that external validation. Now, as silly as it sounds, I think it feels very like necessary as a small Asian community that we want the validation from the small community we have. So I was wondering like what you feel about like those pressures.
Was there another question that I saw? Yeah,
I had a question for Ken and Sarat about like nonprofit stuff. Like a lot of people that I've talked to in the nonprofit space kind of talk about the instability of the nonprofit space in particular, like money dries up fast. And I know like a lot of the junior staff that I worked with, like turnover is like kind of high. And I feel like you've stayed at OSA for a really long time and you've been with Apex for a really long time. And I was kind of just wondering about like your perspective about like the instability of nonprofits, like why people might leave so fast, or like how you have like stayed with the organization for so long. That's fine.
great, Chelsea.
This is kind of similar to the question that was asked 2 questions ago, but something I feel like is really important, and like a really large trend that is going on amongst college students is like students coming into college really passionate about public service, but then like kind of really easily falling into a trap of like going to like consulting or tech or finance and things like that. So my question is like, how do you think institutions or like colleges themselves can kind of avoid this kind of brain drain almost? Or like what perspective can students take on to kind of avoid this kind of mindset of like kind of selling out from like their initial passions of public service?
Great, then you had a question?
Yeah, I know we talked a lot about law school. It's supposed to be that law school is not like a prerequisite for public service. What's the appeal of like what type of person should pursue law school with and like idea of public service in mind? And what like type of person is that not really necessary nor like worth it?
Great, any other questions? Yeah,
Sorry, I also have one question. First, I'm happy, just because both of you mentioned that it kind of felt like law school was missing something that you all seem to have discovered in public service. Maybe you mind kind of elaborating on what those aspects were, and whether you think that's something that is inevitable with law school and law careers, or whether you think it was something else particular to your experience.
yeah.
So I also have a question. That's a big question for Kathy. It's kind of like building on a lot of what people said, but like, I feel like, yes, it's very important. I hope that like, when people are applying to university, that like they don't always focus on prestige. But I feel like that's been people have been saying that you should not focus on prestige for decades and decades. And as a history major, I know that it's very important to like learn from past mistakes, not to like repeat the past mistakes. So I'm just very disillusioned sometimes. Like I feel like the call is still there, but people won't listen, or people will just still go like for the prestige and stuff. But like, how do we like try to break down like history of like of these same calls, but like try to like make real change, make real progress and stuff, kind of up there.
Great, any other thoughts from folks? Yeah.
I think my question is about like law school again. I think it was like a job off on the fear that she asked. But if you both could have told your past self one thing prior to going into law school that you wish you would have known, that maybe would have like changed your decision of going to law school, or at least prepared you better as to what you would have expected, what would you have told yourself?
Great. Any final thoughts from folks in the room? Okay, so we have about 10 minutes and a handful of questions, but many of them are similar. So what I would say is there's probably a question on power, prestige, access to institutions in public service. There's a separate question on like law school and if it's helpful and all the other things associated with it. And I would say we probably need a couple session on like navigating grad school. So
Yeah.
maybe that's something that we can help facilitate in the future, whether it happens this summer or later on. So we'll take that for action on our end. And then there's this question on kind of the allure, but also the reality of some of these roles in the nonprofit sector and public service, right? Like how do you balance immediate need and kind of the world that we're living in and the world that we're trying to build? So those are the 3 types of questions that I heard. do y'all wanna kind of chime in, as appropriate and you can probably touch
Sure.
on a lot of them, Sarat?
I'm gonna try to just hopefully answer a few of those questions. With law school, I think if it's something that you truly want to do, absolutely go there, but know, that it is going to be a large financial, investment in yourself. So going back to, finding, how do you balance that, going where prestige or, where, maybe a school that will give you a lot more money and may not be quite seen as, prestigious. I'm gonna put my my former career services hat on just for a second. When I was in law school, I worked in my school's career services office, and the one thing I always shared with folks is, what is it that you want to do? So, for example, if you want to go into ranching law, are you going to go to Harvard? Sure, there's very prestigious, but you know what? University of Montana probably has the top ranching law program. And where's University of Montana on the rankings? At that time, they're in the bottom quarter. But having that like sense of what is it that you want to do? What direction do you want to go in? What type of, law, or is it public service? Like having something else to kind of guide you other than these rankings. Because again, once you're out, and you've practiced, it doesn't really matter that much anymore. What matters is passing that bar exam and being licensed somewhere. I think that is, making sure you actually, take the bar exam. That's something that I will always advocate for. If you go to law school and you spend that much time, money, and, sweat and tears, get the bar, get licensed somewhere. But, what is it? Would I do it again? Absolutely. Do I think it was necessary? Probably not, but what would I have done differently? Maybe take a year off in between, because I went straight from undergrad right into law school. And I did a pretty heavy load in undergrad too. And I realized looking back, I probably would have benefited from just a pause. But at the time, I think I was just worried that I would not go back or not be able to go back into, the education or go back into school. I don't think that's the case now, looking back. I think it would have helped me mentally, physically to just take a breather. So if I could tell my younger self that, like, go ahead, take that break and just know that, if this is what you want to do, go for it. I think what law school teaches you is that ability to write and think critically is so key. And that's something that you can take wherever you end up.
That's great. Kathy?
Yeah, so I can talk about the prestige thing, touch on that, and then also kind of law school, which I totally agree. I think the criteria for whether you should go to law school or not is whether you want to practice law. Like, don't go to law school, because this is something that I heard all the time when I was considering it, which is like, you should just get a law degree. It's so versatile. And it's not versatile. It's very versatile in DC. Maybe it's versatile in New York. But you know what's, it's not versatile, like in, I don't know, like Philly. Like, you have a law degree, you're gonna have to practice law like that. And so I think it's important to think about that. I feel like that was something that, for me, it ended up not mattering, because I ended up in DC and truly did find it like very versatile degree. But had I stayed in Chicago, I think it may have been one of those things where it was just like a total waste of money. Now, granted, my loans were forgiven, like public service loan forgiveness, yay. Right, but it would have been, it just would have been kind of unnecessary expense, time, that wouldn't have helped me in my career at all. I do think in DC, having a law degree did help me in my career, right? So you kind of have to think about that a little bit. I think a surefire way of knowing whether you should go to law school is, if you want to practice law, you should go to law school. if you think you might want to do something else and that law degree might just be like a bonus, I would think real hard about that and whether that's worth it. And again, it depends a little bit on where you ultimately end up. Different localities have different professional ecosystems. DC is a very versatile one. The prestige stuff, I mean, like, I don't know that I have like a real answer for that, because I still struggle with it, right? Like, I look at my career and I'm like, I was on the Hill, I was like in the administration, like my next job has to be like something that is comparable, which is like something that I obviously still struggle with. I will say, here's actually, and this touches on the law school question a little bit, that I was thinking a perfect example of why rankings should not be the most important thing is when I was applying to law school, I got into the University of Minnesota or University of Michigan Law School, like great law school, top 10 law school, I think still, I assume, right? Fantastic law school. Then I got into University of Chicago, which is like a top 5 law school. And I was like, oh, of course I'm going to University of Chicago. So I went and it was great. And I come to DC, and you know what would have been really helpful? The University of Michigan network. There are very few University of Chicago law graduates working in DC that are like not at big law firms. Michigan though, like those of you who know, like U of M people, like they're crazy, they're rabid, they like love their network. And they are, I think DC, my husband went to Michigan, so I think he told me that like DC has the largest contingent of Michigan alums outside of Michigan, right? And so like, so that I think is like a really good example of why, and I don't know like how you get people to stop chasing rankings. I think especially with like family pressures and similar to Sarat, like I went straight through. My parents were like super, I don't know why I was like still listening to them, like after graduating from college, but I just felt like, oh, I can't take time off because like my parents are super against it. And so I didn't. And it's one of those things where like, I don't know how you kind of like, other than to say now with like 16 years out of law school, looking back, like these are the things that I know for certain didn't matter. The rankings don't matter anymore. Where like these are things that I now know, and all I can do, I think, is like pass that on, and hope that people, take it to heart. And when you feel the pressure, maybe remember that like, here's a group of like seasoned people telling you like truly like more than 5 years out of grad school and nobody cares where you went to law school, which I kind of feel a little cheated by because I worked really hard to get into one of these like prestigious schools. Doesn't do me any good right now. So
I think it's I mean, this is gonna be stating the obvious. If you are doing it for yourself, you truly want to go to law school, go. But if you're doing it for somebody else, your parents, whoever, you are going to be miserable. And it is not going to be a fun experience. I would say that. So it is, make sure it is something you truly want to do.
Yeah, okay, Kent. Final thoughts on nonprofit, power, prestige, public
Yeah.
service, institution, system building.
the instability, I think, is the question.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of just have to prioritize what you value, to be honest. Like working in public sector is not easy. Like that's why it's kind of heartbreaking with the federal government now firing all those employees. Like people do it not for the money. We don't make a lot of money. We do it because we care. And so I knew that working nonprofit, I wouldn't make as much money as I could in the private sector. But I knew I wanted to work for a nonprofit, and I knew I wanted to leave Louisiana, and live on my own, away from my family, and not because they're bad. Like I love my family, but just I didn't want to stay in Louisiana. And so I love living in DC, the public transit, all this stuff. Like I really care. Like I really value like cold weather, public transit, not having to drive my car all the time. And so like those are things that I can't have in Louisiana. So I value that. I valued helping people in nonprofit. Thankfully, we haven't had to like fire people at OCA. There's been a lot of turnover, but just because people go to grad school or people just like again want higher pay. But so far we've been lucky enough to like not have to deal with that. But I don't know what the future has to hold, because right now, like there's cuts to a lot of funding due to DEI. So a lot of like our sponsors and stuff are like cutting back, and like we don't know what next year is gonna look like or the year after that, or the next 4 years with this current administration. And so really just think about, again, your values, and are you willing to kind of make your life a little bit harder, pursuing the work that you love doing. And so hopefully that's helpful, but that's just my personal experience. And so, yeah.
One last thing on the financial point, like it really right now is maybe not a good time to take on a bunch of loans, because like literally right now in the reconciliation bill, they're looking at completely changing the student loan process. And you really might wanna wait until the bill is like passed before making any decisions, because paying a monthly student loan bill of $200 versus like $1,700, which is actually, like, my husband still has a year left on his student loans, and like, that's what will happen to our monthly bill, literally $200 right now to $1,700, which like, it's fine, because he's only got a year left. But you know, it's stark difference. And so just like very practical piece of advice right now, things are
Yeah.
kind of crazy.
It's also, you know, on the Hill, and also I think some agencies,
That's right.
they will pay for a portion of your student loans. And so I was able to pay off my student loans a lot quicker because I was in offices that, you know, help pay for a portion of my student loans.
And to Chelsea, to your point on like the reality that's going on, and all of us kind of touched on it. I love Kapal, I love public service, I love the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community, but I also like all of us here, we're like grounded in the year 2025, and we're witnessing what's happening. Like I was in public service up until now, and now I work in the private sector, right? So it's kind of like a diversion from the rest of the panel. But my heart's like fully in public service, and it's changed for me in how I'm doing public service now. So now I teach at GW, and I'm teaching people about the power of local and state government and how do we power map those systems, so to Dilpreet's point, and to kind of really reanimate that point of like public service doesn't have to mean being in Washington DC all the time. And especially for the folks who are joining virtually, right? So that's like point number one for me. Point number two is there are seasons of public service that you will partake in and that you will participate in. And the season that I'm in right now, like I always see the world as like major chords and minor chords. Like my major chord for the last decade has been federal public service. My major chord right now is understanding the advent of artificial intelligence. My minor chord right now is thinking about academia and public service, right? So like there are different strings that you can touch on as you're thinking about your major and minor chord. And it just so happens that like public service for me right now is like, I'm sitting on 3 nonprofit boards. And that's really important because I'm helping to help navigate based on my experience in public service over the past decade, right? So it might happen that like you all graduate into an environment, and Dilpreet even brought this up, she graduated into a recession, right? My brother graduated into a recession. In like the financial situation of the world might look different. So I do think we need to hedge a little bit as a community. And part of that is also recognizing that public service will look different. It might be part-time, it might be full-time, it might be a Fulbright or an AmeriCorps or Teach for America, but it also might mean that like you go into tech or healthcare or whatever, and then you come back as a fellow and you do Tech Congress, or you come back as someone who's working with the advancement of American science, and you're doing a fellowship with the Federation for American Scientists, right? So it could look and feel different. So think about like what your major chord is and what your minor chord is, but also begin to think about how do you want different seasons of your life to look like, because that burnout piece is really important. And you don't want to burn out when you're 21 or 22. You want to make sure that you have the agility to grow in a career that will be fulfilling over the course of many, many decades to come. So that's kind of my little 2 cents on what's going on, but I think we're at time. Y'all have been so great with your questions. I personally learned so much from you, and I'm inspired by the work that y'all are leading and the internships that y'all are in. We who are alum of Kapal and are part of the ANHPI community are committed to helping you and making sure that you're successful. Because your success is a guarantor of the community's success, and goes back to your point on how do we build power as a community. So thank you all for joining, and I'll hand it back to Shama and to Hannah.
Awesome, let's give a huge round of applause. If you can't fill out the attendee survey, please fill that out. Your responses do help keep our programs running, believe it or not, so please do fill out that survey. And yeah, I don't know, Denise, if there was anything else to close us out, but if not, thank you so much for attending our first session of the summer.
Thank you all. Another announcement, we do have more food, so grab a plate, and if you want to grab a plate to go for lunch tomorrow, you're welcome to do that as well.
And I'm happy to stay and answer any questions too.